So let's go ahead and just clear out the current scene. We can go New Scene, and I'm going to start with just the default atmosphere, and I'm not going to keep the Lightwave light and camera. Go over to our view interface, and let's just create a little bit of a scene really quick. And what I can use is just a procedural terrain. I'm going to turn off zero edges, and we'll bring down that value a little. Actually, we'll bring it down to, we could do 0.3 to get a little more variation in there. And I kind of want to raise our peaks up a little bit higher and create some better valleys that we have. And we can change the filter that we have just for the shape of the object. And we can see that starts to bring it up a little bit more. I'm going to go back to Edit Filter, create a new key point, and just kind of pull out that upper area. Click OK. And now it's starting to kind of cap out on the top, so I might want to bring that down. And we can modify that a little bit more. And another thing that works really well for this is just going into the function editor. We can select our link, and we're going to add a filter node, and we're going to use the sine wave. If we take a look at our output observer, we'll be able to get a little bit of a better idea of what this sine wave is doing. And we just kind of want to cap out some of those areas. And if we use the brightness enough, we start to almost create a negative effect in the exact opposite sort of elevation that we have. And because I'm using that sine wave, I'm going to go ahead and remove that filter so we can start to bring down those objects again, or that detail on the top of the terrain. We can see that a little bit better. I'm going to switch to our scale mode. I'm also going to pull up our camera, full view, and I'm just going to size down on the Z-axis just to stretch it in a little. And what we're going to create is just a couple of particles kind of going through our terrain a little, and we're going to have some trees in there we're going to add. And we're not looking for anything too specific, but we just want to have some particles flowing through that we can work with hypervoxels and kind of blend the scene together. I'm going to go to our atmosphere editor, and under the sun tab, raise our sun up in the sky a little, and we can also adjust its rotation and position. And that seems to be good around the default value for that. We'll bring down the pitch just a little. And I also want to move our camera down so we are not really seeing that horizon line in the back. And now I'm going to add a new material to this terrain and also add on a little bit of an ecosystem. So we'll go ahead and load in just a material. And I'm going to use one of the asileFX terrain materials. We'll just load in more of a rocky surface. And I also want to change our camera aspect and its overall resolution. So we'll set this to 16:9, and I want to change our resolution to 720 on the width or the height, and 1280 on our overall width, and that way we can have that 720p HD resolution. And now we can see a fairly decent looking terrain showing up. We can go ahead and render a quick frame of that. And in that case, what I actually want to do is just tone this down to a little bit of a lower resolution, something that will render slightly faster. And we can just see that basic terrain, that little bit of a rocky texture on there, rendered out. Move the camera around just a little. Now let's go ahead and add an ecosystem to this. We just want to add some plants and some trees. And what I'm going to be doing is just painting this. What I want to do is just go back to our 4 viewport And we can take a look while we're in our camera view. And then we want to paint directly on the top view so we can see the areas. So let's start out by opening up the Ecosystem Painter. I'm going to add in a plant. And we'll select the maple. And I want to start out by using single instance just to get an idea of size. We'll go ahead and create just by clicking, and we can see that's a very large tree, so I'll undo that. We're going to need to turn down our scale, and let's try around 0.2, so I can go ahead and type that value in. Add one more. We can see it's very small this time. Undo that, maybe make it a little larger. And just want to get the size so it looks correct with our scene, because our terrain is not sized to scale, although our plants typically are. And just a little larger than that, and that should be good. So we're at 0.231, and I want to change this to our brush. And now we can start to brush this in. I'm going to turn down our brush radius and decrease our brush flow. And we just want to add in some of these trees to the areas on our terrain. Kind of move along the sides, but really just focusing on this specific area. And another reason why I'm painting instead of just creating a quick ecosystem within the material editor is this way we can focus directly on this area without creating any functions to just be specifically by the camera. Because of course we wouldn't want all of these polygons and trees in the scene if we don't need them. We'll go ahead and add some more of these plants to the valley. And that looks like that should be good. Maybe we'll add just a few more to that ridge to the left. And always keeping in mind where your camera is looking. And that way you can just pinpoint that specific area and paint on all of the terrain just around the camera. And we don't have to worry about going all the way around. So that should be good. Got a rocky scene. Now we've added lots of maple trees in. And we might need to adjust some of our lighting settings now because of that. Just because we can see a lot more, and now we have these plants in the scene that are creating a lot of shadow. So what we want to do is switch this to global illumination, which is going to look a lot better. And whenever you're using global illumination, you want to make sure that you start to change your light balance, because right now our light balance is more towards sunlight, which means we're getting very harsh shadows. We've still got a very nice blending, and really depending on the exposure and how bright the day is out, this actually could be a correct look. But leaves are mostly a little bit translucent, so we would still see a little more light in those wooded areas. So what we can do is start to bring in that slider towards the ambient value. And that's going to create more of an even looking light throughout our scene and starting to lighten up those darker areas. What we can also do, if right now, since we've moved it to ambient, we don't have nearly as much sunlight in the scene, it's much duller and it's certainly not as bright. We could use the light intensity setting, or we could increase the sky dome lighting gain, which will specifically just adjust how our objects are affected rather than the entire scene, which would include clouds and the sky if we had some of these other settings on. Went over to our checkbox here to sky and clouds. If I go ahead and brighten this up right now, it also adds to that, and since we're not affecting the sky and clouds, it doesn't take too much away from our scene. Go ahead and tone that down just a little and use more of the sky dome lighting gain, which will also help with our ambient values. And we can pull that a little more towards ambient, and that start to look a lot better, especially in the different shadowed areas. We can also adjust our ambient light setting, whether or not we would like it to come more from the sky or a uniform amount. And once we start to switch that to uniform, we can see that coming up just a little bit better. And that's going to create a really nice looking render. So we'll go ahead and click OK. And what I also want to do just a little is take our camera and adjust its focal so we have more of a wide range on it and a wide angle lens. And that's going to look a little bit better. If we go into Lightwave, we can see that is going to match up correctly. And we don't need to worry about changing anything because of that focal. Now I also want to add some more variation in plant life, just so it looks a little more realistic. Something more interesting than just a whole bunch of maples. So we can go back into our ecosystem painter, and I'm going to add in a new object. We're going to select a plant, and I'm going to be using some of the objects that are available directly through us and through Cornucopia. And I'm going to select one of our grasses. And we'll go ahead and use the buffalo grass, which is a pretty neat looking overall texture. And what we need to do is just determine the scale of this. So we want to select paint what, only selected item. And that way we're just selecting our grass right now, because that's all we want to be painting. And we don't really want to paint any more maple trees. And specifically in the areas of where we're at right now. So we're going to move our view down where we can see where the camera is really focusing on more of the close-ups. Change this to single instance and go ahead and click in the scene. And now we can see we have a very small grass. Go ahead and undo that, and I might just scale that up a little and add that in there. And see if we can see anything showing up in our camera view. And that should be good, so we'll go ahead and change that to brush. And now we can just add in a bit of this grass, increase our flow, and I'm also going to turn off limit density. And we'll increase our scale just a little bit. And try a couple of different things. And we just want to add kind of around the base of some of these maple trees. And that'll give us a nice look on some of the overhangs. And since the maple trees are so densely populated, we really won't be seeing inside of them. So we don't need to worry about having too much on the inside. Go ahead and just kind of paint that in. And go along the back. And we might want to add a few more to some of these areas. And that looks like that should be good. So we can go ahead and close that out. And now we've got a lot of new plants in there. And it'll definitely look a lot more realistic. So let's first create a little render just within View itself before we bring it over to Lightwave and start modifying the scene more. So let's do 800 by 450. I'm going to set this to broadcast. Then we can go ahead and render that out and take a look. And we can see that render out pretty nice. Of course, the native maple trees do have a little bit of a weird look to them, but overall they look pretty good. Usually the best thing to do is sort of modify that maple tree by increasing the flexibility of the leaves. And typically you want to type in a value much higher than 100, usually around 200, to sort of bend those leaves down a little. And that can sometimes give a little more realistic look. Right now this looks pretty good though. I'm just going to stick with that. And we can go ahead and just close that out. And now when we go into Lightwave, we can start taking a look at modifying this overall scene.